7-year-old Emma sat on the wooden courtroom bench, her legs barely dangling over the edge. She didn't fidget. She didn't speak. Her eyes stayed focused on the leash in her hands, and the golden retriever lying loyally at her feet. The DOG's name was Luna, and to Emma, she was more than a pet. She was a lifeline. It wasn't Emma's first time in a courtroom. She had been here before, just a few months ago, when the adults decided she could safely return to her stepfather's home after her mother passed away. Everyone had hoped it would be fine. They were wrong. Now she was back, but this time was different. This time, Luna was beside her. And this time, Emma wasn't going to stay quiet forever. Across the room sat her stepfather, Jared Miller, in a neatly pressed suit. His arms were folded, his expression unreadable. To the strangers in the courtroom, he looked like a concerned guardian. To Emma, he looked like a shadow that never stopped following her. She didn't need to look up to know he was watching her. She could feel it in her skin. Judge Halston, a man in his 60s with kind but cautious eyes, adjusted his glasses and looked over the case file. It was supposed to be a routine custody review, but nothing about Emma's case had ever been routine. Ms. Reynolds, the judge said, glancing toward the woman seated beside Emma. Are we still proceeding with the child's testimony today? Ms. Reynolds, Emma's social worker, exchanged a quick glance with Emma, then looked back at the judge. Your Honor, she said carefully. Emma has not spoken since she was removed from the home 6 weeks ago. However, she does have her support dog Luna with her. She uses nonverbal communication with Luna when she's feeling overwhelmed or scared. A judge raised an eyebrow. Are you saying the dog is trained to interpret her signals? Yes, sir, she replied. They've worked together with a trauma specialist. Emma uses coded taps or gestures when she's too afraid to speak. The courtroom murmured quietly. The idea sounded unusual to most people in the room, but Ms. Reynolds had seen it work firsthand. In the foster home, when Emma felt scared, she would tap Luna's paw twice, and the dog would immediately alert the adults. It wasn't a trick. It was a survival method. The judge looked over at Emma. Emma, he said gently, do you understand why you're here today? Emma didn't lift her head. She gave no answer. He tried again. Do you feel safe right now? Still nothing. The silence was heavy. It was the kind of silence that made grown people uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. But Emma sat still, like she was used to it. Luna rested her head on the child's shoe, sensing her rising anxiety. The judge sighed and leaned back in his chair. Jared Miller cleared his throat. Your Honor, I've done everything required by Child Protective Services. I think it's clear this girl just needs stability. I can give that to her. Emma's hand suddenly twitched. No one saw it, but Luna. A small, barely visible movement. A quick double tap on Luna's paw with Emma's fingers. Luna's ears perked up, her eyes focused. She stood up slowly and faced forward, her body suddenly tense. The courtroom shifted again. The judge narrowed his eyes. Was that a signal? He asked, looking toward Ms. Reynolds. Ms. Reynolds stood up, her voice calm but serious. Yes, Your Honor, that was the danger signal. The air in the room turned cold. A danger signal? The judge asked, leaning forward. Mrs. Reynolds nodded slowly. Emma uses 2 taps when she feels unsafe or threatened. Luna has been trained to alert us when she receives it. Jared leaned back, suddenly uncomfortable. The judge studied the dog, then looked at Emma. She still hadn't spoken. Her eyes remained low, but her hand tightened on the leash. I see, the judge said, his voice lowering. He turned toward the bailiff. Please remain near the defendant's table. Jared opened his mouth to protest, but the judge raised a hand. Let's give the child a moment, the judge said. Clearly rethinking everything that Emma slowly reached into her coat pocket. The courtroom hushed as she pulled out a folded paper, gently placing it in Luna's mouth. The dog looked at her, waiting. Then, without hesitation, Luna trotted forward and made her way to the judge's bench. The judge blinked in surprise as the dog placed the paper at his feet. He picked it up and unfolded it carefully. It was a photo granny, printed on cheap paper, but clear enough. Emma, sitting on a kitchen floor, her back to the camera. Her shirt was pulled up just enough to reveal deep purple bruises, finger marks. Fading, but unmistakable. Gasps broke the silence. Miss A. Reynolds covered her mouth, recognizing the image immediately. She had been told a neighbor might have seen something, but the photo had never been submitted. No one knew Emma had it. The judge stared at the image for several long seconds, then looked at Emma. She still hadn't spoken. But everything had changed. The silence was no longer passive. It was screaming. The judge glanced at the bailiff. "We're going to need a private recess now." As the courtroom emptied, Emma still didn't move. But her hand reached down again and rested gently on Luna's head. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The signal had been sent. And for the first time, the adults were finally listening. Inside the judge's chambers, the heavy door closed behind them with a solid click. For a long moment, no one spoke. Emma sat on a leather chair that seemed far too big for her, her small frame swallowed up by the silence. Luna sat at her feet, her body still tense, eyes flicking from Emma to each adult in the room. Judge Halston stood at the window, holding the folded photograph in his hand. His expression was unreadable, part disbelief, part sorrow. Ms. Reynolds sat beside Emma, close enough to offer comfort, but careful not to crowd her. On the other side of the room was Dr. Mara Jennings, a child trauma psychologist who had worked with Emma before. She'd been called in urgently as soon as the photo reached the judge. "Emma," Dr. Jennings said softly, kneeling to Emma's level. "I'm here, and I promise no one will make you do anything you don't want to do. Luna is here to help too, just like always." Emma didn't look up. She gently touched Luna's fur, brushing her fingers behind the dog's ear. That single motion, subtle and rhythmic, was one of her calming patterns. Judge Halston turned from the window, placing the photo face down on his desk. "I don't want to re-traumatize her," he said quietly. "But I also don't want to let this go unspoken." Miss Reynolds nodded. "She doesn't have to testify. Not if you believe the photo is credible evidence. But ... Emma has a way of speaking without using her voice. You saw that in the courtroom." Dr. Jennings looked at Emma. "Again, would it be okay if I asked just one question?" she said gently. "And you can answer with Luna." Emma didn't say a word, but after a moment, she gave one slow nod. Dr. Jennings smiled warmly and placed her hand softly in her lap. "Emma ... when you gave Luna that picture, were you telling us the truth about what happened?" Emma's fingers paused on Luna's fur. Then she reached her hand down, brushed twice along Luna's front leg, and looked away. The danger signal? Again. Dr. Jennings' voice remained calm, but her expression shifted. She just confirmed it. The judge leaned forward, his brow furrowing. "So this isn't something she was coached to do?" "No, Your Honor," Dr. Jennings replied. "Emma was trained by a trauma response specialist to use these signals when she was too afraid or overwhelmed to speak. It gives children like her a way to communicate control, even in powerless situations." Ms. Reynolds added, "It saved her more than once. This time, she waited until she was sure she would be heard. That dog isn't just emotional support, Luna. Is a living bridge between her pain and her truth." The judge looked at Emma again, and his tone softened. "Emma," he said gently, I want you to know that I believe you. I believe what your picture showed me. And I promise you, you won't have to go back there. Emma's hand gripped Luna's leash tightly. Her bottom lip quivered, and her eyes welled, but she didn't cry. She nodded, then leaned her cheek against Luna's warm back. The dog remained still as a statue, soaking in her pain, anchoring her to the safety of the moment. Dr. Jennings gave a gentle smile. You did something very brave today, Emma, and that picture you kept, it showed the truth. The judge stepped forward and knelt slowly, eye level with the little girl. You saved yourself, he said softly, and you probably saved other kids too. That's what heroes do. Emma blinked slowly, but her shoulders dropped a little. She didn't know the word hero could belong to someone like her. But for the first time in a long time, she felt something warm in her chest, something close to safety. Back in the courtroom, the doors opened again, and people filtered into their seats. Jared Miller sat straighter, as if he had been preparing his closing argument. He glanced toward the judge's door, smugness painted across his features. But that smugness began to crack the moment Judge Halston returned, face tight, hands steady, and voice firm. This court has seen enough, the judge began. In light of new photographic evidence, the child's nonverbal communication, and professional analysis from a licensed psychologist, I am issuing a no-contact order effective immediately. Gasps rippled across the room. Jared jumped to his feet. What? That's outrageous. She's confused. She's making this up. The bailiff moved closer. She has the mental capacity of a traumatized child. Jared shouted. Judge Halston slammed the gavel down once. Sit down, Mr. Miller. The courtroom froze. Halston's voice dropped lower, calm with the weight of finality. This child may be quiet, but she is not confused. She communicated, clearly using the tools we failed to understand before. I commend her for her strength, and I thank the people who ensured she had a voice when others didn't want to hear it. Jared was silent now, realizing the weight of the moment. The judge continued, Emma will be placed in the continued care of the state until a safer long-term guardian can be determined. This court also recommends a full investigation into Mr. Miller's prior conduct during unsupervised visits. Effective immediately, he is no longer a candidate for custody. Emma and Luna were led out of the private chamber door, away from the cameras and reporters now gathering outside. She didn't see Jared's face when he was escorted out of the room. She didn't need to. For the first time in months, she wasn't afraid to leave the building. Because for the first time, someone had listened when she spoke in silence. And Luna, the dog no one wanted to allow in court, had delivered the message with perfect clarity. The news traveled faster than anyone expected. By the following morning, a photograph taken from the courthouse parking lot had made its way to local media. In the picture, Emma was seen stepping into a waiting car, with Luna at her side and Miss Reynolds holding the door. The child's face was mostly hidden, but the dog's stance, protective and alert, seemed to tell the story no words ever had. Back inside the city courthouse, whispers echoed through the halls. Staff who had handled the case just days earlier began second-guessing everything. How could they have missed the signs? How had Emma endured so much and still found the strength to send that signal? Judge Halston stood at his office window, arms crossed. His coffee sat untouched on his desk. He had presided over hundreds of cases in his time: violent crimes, custody battles, painful family disputes, but none lingered like this one, because this case hadn't been cracked open by evidence. Files or long testimony. It had been changed by a silent signal and the unwavering loyalty of a dog. His clerk knocked and entered quietly. Sir, she said softly, Detective Arnold is here from Family Crimes. He wants to review the photo and request an official statement. The judge nodded. Send him in. Detective Arnold entered briskly. He was a seasoned man in his 50s, with a tired face and a notepad in hand. Your Honor, he said, I've reviewed the original CPS file. There was nothing in it that directly proved abuse at the time. The neighbor's concern wasn't followed up because the girl didn't talk. Halston gave a tight nod. She still hasn't spoken publicly, but she communicated in her own way, and it was crystal clear. Arnold sat down across from the judge. I want to speak with the girl, carefully, with her support dog present. I believe her. But if there are more victims, or if this man had a history, we need to know now. The judge sighed. You'll have to go through her therapist and caseworker. She trusts very few people. But I agree. We need to know what else Jared Miller has been hiding. Meanwhile, in the safe house on the city's edge, Emma was sitting in a quiet sunroom with Luna curled beside her. A morning light poured through the window, casting warm rays across her pale hands. She still hadn't said much. After the hearing, she had whispered a few words to Ms. Reynolds and Dr. Jennings, but her silence had mostly returned, and no one was rushing her. Here, in this quiet house with no shouting, no slamming doors, no footsteps in the hallway at night, she was safe. And safety, for a child like Emma, was the rarest thing in the world. Miss Inner sat in a chair across the room, writing notes into her report, but keeping her body relaxed and non-intrusive. She had learned not to ask too much too quickly. Emma would come when she was ready. Luna stirred slightly, and Emma reached over, gently scratching behind her ears. Then slowly, she reached into the backpack by her side and pulled out something small, a folded piece of construction paper. She got up, walked across the room, and handed it to Ms. Reynolds. Reynolds opened it slowly. Inside was a drawing. Crayons. On paper, it showed a little girl holding the leash of a big yellow dog. Behind them stood a house with a red roof, and beneath it, in uneven lettering, were 4 simple words. Luna kept me safe. Ms. Reynolds smiled, tears prickling the corners of her eyes. She did, she said softly. And so did you. Emma didn't respond, but she sat down beside Luna again and leaned her head on the dog's side. The message was clear. Words or not, her voice had never been stronger. Back at the courthouse later that day, Judge Halston met briefly with the Child Welfare Board. During the meeting, several members raised questions about the long-term future of children, like Emma, those too afraid to testify, too fragile for interviews. How do we make space for them? One board member asked, not just legally, but emotionally. How do we give them the room to speak in the ways they can? The room fell silent for a moment. Then the judge spoke. We start by listening differently. We stop measuring truth only by volume. We listen to hands, to eyes, to fear, and sometimes to a dog. One of the members leaned forward. Do you think this case could justify a policy proposal for courtroom service animals? I don't just think it, the judge replied. I'll write it myself. That evening, Emma was visited by Dr. Jennings at the safe house. She brought along a special guest, Detective Arnold, who came unarmed, dressed in plain clothes, and with an offering, a soft toy dog with a tag that read, Detective Dog. He approached slowly. Hi, Emma. I brought you this. He's not nearly as smart as Luna, but maybe you can help teach him. Emma looked at the stuffed dog, then back at Luna, who gave it a quick sniff of approval. Arnold knelt beside her. I know you've been through a lot. I don't need you to tell me everything, but I was hoping maybe Luna could help you tell me if there's anything else we should know. About your stepfather. About other things. Emma's fingers twitched slightly on Luna's fur. A single tap. Pause. And another. Dr. Jennings nodded slowly. That's the signal. She's telling you. Yes. Arnold lowered his voice. Okay, then I'm going to listen. However you want to say it. Pictures, notes, signals, anything. You have my attention. Emma looked at him, then down at Luna, then back at the detective Dot, and for the first time, she reached out her hand, not to give a signal, but to take the toy from his fingers. Dot. It was the smallest gesture, but it was enough. The courthouse had never been this quiet. Inside the packed room, Judge Halston stood at the bench, still holding the photograph Emma had delivered through Luna. His hands didn't shake, but there was a tightness around his eyes that betrayed something deeper: anger, maybe, or sorrow. The courtroom had been waiting for a decision. Instead, it was now witnessing a moment no one would forget. Emma sat back down beside Miss Reynolds. Her shoulders were small, but her presence suddenly felt enormous. Luna remained alert at her side, ears raised, eyes locked forward like a soldier. Standing watch, everyone stared at the girl and her dog, waiting for anything to happen. Jared Miller stood frozen across the room, mouth slightly open. His lawyer leaned toward him, whispering frantically, but Jared didn't respond. He just kept his eyes on the photograph. He knew what was coming. I am now submitting this image as evidence, Judge Halston said, breaking the silence. This picture, along with the child's documented nonverbal communication, constitutes an emergency basis for protective action. Jared finally snapped out of his daze. Objection, Your Honor. That photograph could be fake. There's no timestamp, no context. This is being blown completely out of proportion. The judge didn't flinch. Mr. Miller, sit down. Jared remained standing. I'm being accused based on a dog's behavior and a drawing? This is outrageous. The bailiff stepped forward. Judge Halston raised his voice, not loud, but firm. You are being investigated based on evidence trained, behavioral signals confirmed by 2 licensed professionals, and the fact that the only person not surprised by this accusation is you. The tension in the room coiled tight. I don't tolerate intimidation in my courtroom, the judge added. This child has gone through unimaginable pain and still found the courage to communicate. I suggest you stop talking and start listening. The courtroom fell silent again. This time, it wasn't awkward. It was heavy with realization. Luna laid her head across Emma's lap as Ms. Reynolds gently placed an arm around the girl's shoulders. There were no tears from Emma, only quiet resolve in her stillness. From the back row, a woman with a camera and press badge slowly lowered her lens. She wasn't there for the custody hearing. She had come by accident, covering a completely unrelated case in the room next door. But now she was frozen, watching history write itself in real time. She whispered to the person next to her, "Did that dog just hand evidence to the judge?" The answer didn't come not because the person didn't know, but because they were too stunned to speak. 10 minutes later, in Judge Halston's chambers, the private conversation resumed. Emma sat with Luna curled tightly against her side, her hand never leaving the leash. Dr. Jennings and Ms. Reynolds sat nearby, while the judge reviewed the photo once more under a lamp's close light. "I need to ask," Halston said softly. "Where did this photo come from?" "It wasn't in any official file." Ms. Reynolds leaned forward. "We had a tip from a neighbor months ago, saying she suspected abuse. But they couldn't produce any proof at the time. We made a visit, and everything seemed fine." Emma said nothing. There were no marks that day. Then the referral was closed. Dr. Jennings added, "It's very likely Emma kept the photo hidden. Children in trauma often hold on to their evidence privately, waiting for the right moment." "She was protecting herself," Ms. Reynolds said. "She knew when to show it. Not during another home visit. Not in foster care, but in court. When someone had the power to change her life." Judge Halston closed the folder slowly. "And she used the dog to do it." He looked at the child again, marveling not just at her bravery, but her brilliance. She hadn't simply reacted, she had planned. She had carried the photo, waited until the moment was right, and used the only voice she trusted, Luna's. "She's extraordinary," Halston said quietly. Emma didn't respond, but her head leaned slightly closer into Luna's side. Back in the courtroom, the bailiff handed down a new order from the bench. Jared Miller was to be taken into temporary custody for questioning Dot. As the bailiff approached him, Jared's composure finally cracked. "This is insane," he shouted. "You people don't know what you're doing. She's a kid, a mute kid with a dog. You can't believe this." The bailiff grabbed him by the arm. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer said. "For once," someone murmured in the gallery, "maybe you should use it." The crowd shifted, murmurs rising. Emma was kept away from the chaos, quietly exiting through the side door with Miss Reynolds and Luna. But even as she left, people watched her in awe. Reporters, clerks, even other families waiting for their hearings. She didn't say a word, but the story had already spoken. Dot by the time she reached the car. A reporter had posted on social media, "Child sends danger signal to courtroom through support dog. Judge halts proceedings. Photo evidence confirms abuse. Incredible bravery. Developing story." It went viral in under an hour. That night, Emma sat on a soft blanket beside Luna in her new foster home. A warm bowl of soup sat untouched beside her. Her new foster mother, a kind woman named Marie, gave her space. She didn't push questions. She simply sat nearby, knitting slowly and humming an old lullaby. Emma didn't say anything, but she reached over and took the spoon. Bit by bit, her world was changing, and it had started with a photo and a leash and a dog who never once needed to bark to be heard. Detective Arnold sat quietly in the dim corner of the interview room, the notebook in his lap still closed. Across from him, Emma sat with her knees tucked under her small frame wrapped in a soft blanket. Luna lay stretched along the floor. Beside her, ever present, her tail slowly sweeping the floor in a slow rhythm every time Emma shifted her hand. Dr. Jennings sat between them, speaking softly as she prepared Emma for the session. She wasn't here to interrogate. She was here to help translate a language built on fear, trust, and signals. "We're going to let Emma share what she wants," Dr. Jennings said. "Not through questions, through choice." Detective Arnold nodded. "No pressure. I'm just here to listen." On the table sat a tray of crayons, paper, colored pencils, and a small stack of printed outlines showing homes, faces, and blank scenes, simple tools to let a child fill in the blanks of her story. Emma didn't look at anyone directly, but slowly she picked up a green crayon and reached for the outline of a house. She began to color. One wall of the house was bright yellow, but the window next to it was drawn with thick, dark lines. She picked up the black crayon and covered the entire window until it was just a square of darkness. Dr. Jennings gently tapped her notepad. "That's the room, isn't it?" Emma didn't speak, but she reached down and tapped Luna's paw. Twice. The message was clear. "Yes, Dr. Jennings," translated softly. "That's where it happened." Arnold swallowed hard. He had interviewed hundreds of victims over his career. Some screamed, some wept, some stayed silent. But none had ever spoken through a dog. And none had ever shown this kind of silent strength. The next drawing Emma reached for was of a human figure. She colored the figure's face with red across the cheeks and neck, then used the same black crayon to draw a thick belt across the middle of the figure's waist. She paused. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out something folded. Another photo. Arnold's breath caught. He carefully took it with a gloved hand. It was worn, like it had been folded and hidden away for a long time. The image was blurry, but real Emma, sitting on the edge of a bathtub. Her shirt lifted just enough to show a mark across her shoulder blade. A welt. The timestamp on the photo showed it had been taken a month before her removal from Jared's home. Where did this come from? Arnold asked, gently. Emma didn't answer, but she pointed at Luna. Dr. Jennings translated. She hid it in Luna's collar. Arnold stared at the photo. The fear in her eyes in the picture, the way she hunched her shoulders, as if bracing for something, told a deeper story than any statement could. You were preparing for this, Arnold said, quietly. You were collecting the truth in case no one believed you. Emma said nothing, but her fingers reached toward Luna's collar and touched the spot where the photo had been hidden. This wasn't luck. This was strategy. That afternoon, Emma's second photo was submitted to the judge. Judge Halston was stunned again. This time not just by the evidence, but by the realization of just how much Emma had kept inside. She had built her own system of truth. She had stored away photos like currency, waiting for the exact moment she could spend them for her freedom. He stood before the courtroom and made it official. Let the record reflect, he said, that the child's contribution to this case has not only changed the outcome of these proceedings, but has created a new precedent for the court to recognize and respect nonverbal, trauma-informed communication. He paused, and let it also be known that this child was not rescued. She rescued herself. People in the gallery were silent. No reporters spoke. No lawyers shuffled paper. Every eye was fixed on the bench. Effective immediately, the judge continued, Mr. Jared Miller is to be held without bail pending further investigation. Emma will remain in protected care, and the state will initiate proceedings to expand courtroom accommodations for children requiring service animals. He looked down at Emma, who sat near the back with Luna's head resting across her lap. You've shown us something we forgot, he said directly to her. That silence doesn't mean nothing. Sometimes it means everything. Hours later, in the safe house, Miss Reynolds received a call. She listened quietly, then hung up. Turning to Emma, who sat on the floor with Luna and a stack of puzzle pieces. She smiled softly. That was the judge, she said. He wanted me to tell you something. Emma looked up. Miss Reynolds sat beside her and lowered her voice. He said he's going to make sure no other kid like you has to beg to bring their dog into court. He's writing a proposal to allow service animals in trauma cases. And he's naming it after you. Emma blinked. She didn't smile, but she reached over and took Miss Reynolds' hand. It was the first time she had initiated touch since the day she was removed from Jared's house. Later that night, Emma lay in bed with Luna curled up beside her. The small nightlight in the corner glowed faintly, casting soft shadows across the room. Marie, her new foster mom, gently knocked and peeked in. Need anything, sweet pea? Emma shook her head. Marie nodded and began to leave, but then paused. He'll never find you here. You're safe now. As the door clicked shut, Emma turned toward Luna. Her hand moved under the blanket, and she gave the dog 2 light taps, then 1 more. Dr. Jennings had taught her that the 3rd tap wasn't a warning. It meant safe now. Luna let out a small, content huff and nuzzled her closer. Emma closed her eyes, the leash still wrapped loosely in her hand. She didn't speak a word, but the message was clear. She had survived the storm. And now, for the first time in a long time, she was finally safe in the quiet. The courtroom was unusually full that morning. Lawyers sat straighter in their chairs. Court reporters whispered to one another, pens ready. The bailiff stood stiff near the bench, anticipating what many believed would be a pivotal decision. But the most noticeable presence wasn't a person. It was a golden retriever named Luna, lying calmly beside the young girl who had changed everything. Emma sat quietly in the front row beside Miss Reynolds and Dr. Jennings. Her hands were folded. in her lap, but one hand still held a loose grip on Luna's leash. She wasn't afraid, not like before. But even now, in this echoing room of wood and rules, the leash in her hand still reminded her she wasn't alone. Judge Holston entered through the side door and took his seat. He didn't wear the same stoic mask as before. Today, his expression was different, purposeful, driven. He tapped his gavel once and adjusted the microphone in front of him. This session has been called not just to conclude Emma's protection hearing, he began, but to address a failure in our system. That was revealed by her courage. The room went silent. He looked around at the gallery, then back down at the small girl sitting quietly with her dog. In this courtroom, he continued, we often ask for evidence. We ask for testimony. We ask for words. But what happens when the child who needs help the most cannot speak? What happens when her voice has been stolen by trauma? He paused. We saw what happens. She found another voice. She used her courage, her intelligence, and her trust in an animal to speak through silence. He reached for a document in front of him and held it up. This is a proposal being submitted to the State Judicial Committee, he said. If passed, it will formally authorize support animals to be allowed inside courtrooms during any child welfare, abuse, or trauma-related hearings. He turned toward the gallery. And it will be named the Emma and Luna provision. Gasps and murmurs swept through the gallery. Reporters took notes furiously. One court officer quietly wiped a tear. Emma looked up at the judge for a moment, not long, but long enough that he saw her eyes. And she saw something different in his too. Not just authority, but respect. For now, he continued, Emma will remain in protected custody under the care of Ms. Reynolds and the supervision of trauma specialists. Her former guardian, Jared Miller, will be officially charged and tried based on submitted evidence and photographic proof. He is no longer permitted contact with the child in any form. A gavel hit the wood once more. This court stands with Emma. Applause wasn't allowed in the courtroom, but that didn't stop the gallery from standing. Every person rose to their feet, some in silent recognition, some in quiet awe, and one little girl, sitting in the front row with her hand on a dog's head, simply gave Luna a small signal, 2 taps. Then one more. Safe now. Back at the safe house, Emma sat with Marie at the kitchen table, tracing her finger around the rim of a glass of orange juice. On the table was a letter from Judge Holston, addressed to her directly. Marie smiled as she helped her read it. Dear Emma, today, you taught us how to listen. You showed us that courage doesn't have to be loud. Your voice, however you choose to share it, is powerful. And this courthouse will never forget you. Thank you from all of us, Judge Holston. Emma didn't smile broadly, but she placed the letter gently into her backpack and zipped it closed. She wasn't keeping it just for memory. She was keeping it like her photos, like proof. This time, though, the proof wasn't of pain. It was of power. A week later, the courthouse hosted a small press briefing. It wasn't the usual event. The judge wasn't trying to stir headlines, but he knew public support would help the Emma and Luna provision pass quickly through legislation. He stood at a podium with state officials behind him and spoke clearly. We ask children to be brave in courtrooms, he said. But what are we doing to be brave for them? He held up a photo, not the ones Emma had hidden, but a new one. A shot of Emma and Luna walking together across the courthouse steps, taken by a photographer the day of the final hearing. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. But she changed how we handle trauma in this building forever. Reporters from across the country covered the story. Girl who used dog to testify silently inspires new law. Judge hails child's courage in groundbreaking. Abuse case, Emma and Luna. The teen that changed courtrooms forever. And soon, Emma's story wasn't just local. It was national. not as a tragedy, as a triumph. One morning, 2 weeks after the hearing, Dr. Jennings visited the safe house for her usual session. But this time, Emma surprised her when Dr. Jennings arrived. Emma wasn't curled up on the rug or silently coloring. She was sitting at the table with a folder. Inside were drawings, notes, and another folded paper. But not a photo of abuse. It was a proposal written with help from Marie and Ms. Reynolds for a child signal kit. It included pictures of hand signals, visual cards, and how to train dogs to recognize stress responses in nonverbal children. Dr. Jennings looked through the folder slowly, her heart swelling. "Is this for us?" she asked. Emma nodded. Then, for the first time in a session, she spoke clearly. "I want to help the next kid." Dr. Jennings blinked back tears. "You already are." That night, as the sun dipped below the trees and the sky turned orange, Emma sat on the back porch with Luna beside her. The leash lay on the floor between them, not held tightly, but resting loose. Relaxed. Marie brought out 2 mugs of warm milk and handed one to her. "Can I ask you something, sweetheart?" she said. Emma looked at her and nodded. "When you gave that photo to the judge, were you scared?" Emma thought for a moment, then reached down and gently touched Luna's head. "I was," she whispered. "But I wasn't alone." Marie wrapped her arm gently around Emma's shoulders. "No," she said. "You never will be again." The stars began to appear overhead, one by one. And in that quiet moment, with no noise, no flash, and no fear, Emma looked up and smiled. The world didn't stop after Emma's case, but something in it had changed. 2 months after the courtroom made its ruling, the Emma and Luna provision had passed the first round of state approval. More than a dozen judges across the country had signed open letters supporting the law. And now, across courtrooms in 3 states, certified therapy dogs were being quietly introduced in cases involving trauma-affected children. But the most remarkable change wasn't in policy. It was in children. In a family courtroom, just 2 counties over, a boy named Caleb sat on the witness chair with a golden retriever curled beside him. His hands trembled. He hadn't spoken to any adult in months, not even his foster parents. His father's trial was beginning, and the room was packed with lawyers and unfamiliar faces. But sitting next to him was a trained dog named Harley. Caleb had spent only 2 weeks with Harley, but already the leash in his hand gave him something solid, something that didn't leave when the fear came. The judge, who had read Emma's case in the legal journal, leaned forward gently and asked the boy if he wanted to speak. Caleb didn't answer. Instead, he placed one hand on Harley's head and tapped twice. The courtroom went still. The therapist beside him nodded. "That's the same signal Emma used," she said. "He's saying it's not safe." The judge didn't press. He nodded once and dismissed the boy from the stand. But the trial continued. Because now the room had heard what mattered. Back in the city, Emma sat on a bench outside the trauma center, watching birds flutter between the trees. Summer had arrived, and the air smelled warm and fresh. Luna lay beside her, wearing a special bandana printed with the words, "Courtroom Support Dog, Official, Companion." Emma had a new role now. She wasn't just healing. She was helping others heal. She visited the trauma center once a week with Ms. Reynolds and Dr. Jennings. They didn't force her to speak. Instead, she simply sat with the children, the ones who didn't want to talk, the ones who had been silent for too long. Luna did most of the work. Emma just held the leash, and somehow that was enough. One girl named Olivia, 6 years old, hadn't spoken since being removed from her home. The first few sessions, she sat across the room, staring at the floor. Then one day, while Emma and Luna were drawing quietly on the floor, Olivia got up, crossed the room, and gently touched Luna's fur. Emma looked up. She didn't speak. She simply slid a blank paper across the floor to Olivia. The next 10 minutes were silent, but both girls colored, and when Olivia was ready to leave, she turned and whispered 2 words to her social worker. "Come back." Meanwhile, the media had begun circling again. A local news station requested an interview with Judge Halston. He agreed, but on one condition, that it wouldn't turn into a spectacle. In his interview, he kept his tone professional, but the message was personal. "I've seen children disappear behind their silence," he said. But Emma reminded us that silence isn't absence. It's survival. And when you give a child the tools and the safety to speak in their own way, they will. The anchor asked him if he believed Luna made the difference. "I believe Luna helped unlock the difference," the judge said. But the courage was always inside that child. The dog just reminded us how to listen. Jared Miller's trial began in early July. This time, it wasn't a custody hearing. It was criminal. He was charged with multiple counts of child endangerment, assault, and obstruction. Though Emma didn't testify in court, her photos recorded. Sessions and Dr. Jennings' expert analysis were submitted as key evidence. Emma was protected from attending, but the courtroom still remembered her. Every witness who had worked with her, every specialist, teacher, and social worker told the jury how the little girl had held on to her truth even when no one believed it. She didn't wait to be rescued. One said, "She rescued herself." The trial lasted 5 days. The verdict came back guilty. And just like that, the man who had once silenced her was now silenced by law. Back at the safe house, Emma sat in the garden behind the porch with Luna's head in her lap and a stack of index cards by her side. Each card had a drawing. One showed a leash. Another showed a photo. One had a crayon heart, but the final card showed a stick figure with a cape. It was labeled simply, "The Brave One." She didn't say it out loud, but she had made that one for herself. Marie walked over with a tray of lemonade and placed it down gently. "I just got a call," she said, sitting beside her. "You're invited to the opening ceremony next week. The first therapy dog room in the city's courthouse will be named after Luna." Emma blinked. "And guess who's cutting the ribbon?" Emma's eyes widened. Marie smiled. "You." Emma looked at Luna, who gave a soft little nudge under her arm. Then, for the first time in weeks, Emma gave a small laugh. A quiet one, but real. Days later, on the courthouse steps, a crowd gathered. The ribbon was tied across the door of the newly built Emma and Luna room, a private safe space inside the building where children would meet therapy dogs before their hearings. Judge Halston stood beside the podium, looking proudly toward Emma, who held a giant pair of ribbon scissors in her hand. She didn't speak to the crowd. She didn't need to. She stood tall, with Luna by her side, and raised the scissors with quiet confidence. She cut the ribbon. Applause erupted. Some people cheered, some cried, and some simply stood still, moved in ways they couldn't explain. Because in that moment, the little girl who once couldn't speak had created a voice louder than any. A year had passed. It didn't seem possible 12 full months since that day in court, when a little girl silently handed a photo to a judge through her service dog. But time had moved forward. So had Emma. She now lived permanently with Marie, whose home had become more than safe. It had become her own. The guest room was no longer a temporary space. It was painted in soft sky blue, with white shelves filled with books, framed drawings, and 2 photographs. One of Emma and Luna on the courthouse steps, and another of the moment she cut the ribbon. To the Emma and Luna room. The leash still hung by the door, not because she needed it, but because she chose to keep it close. Luna was no longer classified as an active service dog. She had earned her retirement. But she still went everywhere Emma did, Not out of duty, but out of love. They were inseparable. Always had been. Always would be. In the new school Emma now attended, few classmates knew her full story, and that's the way she liked it. She was no longer the girl from the news, or the child who didn't speak. Here, she was simply Emma, quiet, thoughtful, kind. And yes, she still didn't talk much, but she didn't have to. She had friends now, real ones. A boy named Toby who liked drawing dragons. A girl named Nyla who wore mismatched socks on purpose. And even a shy music teacher who let Emma play soft melodies on the piano in the back of the room during lunch. But what made the biggest difference was that the school had adapted to her. Her first week there, her teacher introduced the class to a visual communication board, one with colors, emotions, signals, and basic needs. She said, "This is for everyone, not just for Emma. Sometimes we all need a different way to be heard." Emma had never forgotten that moment, because for the first time, the world wasn't asking her to catch up. It was meeting her where she already was. In late spring, the courthouse held its first annual Child Advocacy Recognition Ceremony. It was a quiet event, not meant for media attention, but rather for honoring people who made a difference behind the scenes: social workers, foster parents, child therapists. But this year, the final recognition went to someone younger than anyone expected. As Judge Halston took the podium, the room grew still. "This next award," he said, "goes to a young girl who changed the way we listen to children." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "She taught us that bravery doesn't always sound loud. Sometimes it sounds like nothing at all, but it's there. In the quiet moments, in a dog's eyes, in the space between fear and hope." He held up the plaque. It read, "Emma Grace Wells, for courage in silence and the legacy of listening." Emma, now 9, walked to the stage with Luna, trotting faithfully at her side. The applause echoed, soft but full of admiration. When she accepted the plaque, she didn't say anything. She simply nodded and placed one hand on Luna's head. Everyone understood. She didn't need to speak. She already had. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the courthouse steps, Emma and Marie sat on a bench near the garden, watching people slowly leave the event. "Do you feel proud?" Marie asked, brushing a strand of hair behind Emma's ear. Emma looked down at the plaque in her lap. Then she turned to Luna and gave her a gentle pat. "I feel heard," she whispered. It was only 2 words, but Marie smiled like she'd been given the world. "Do you want to do more?" she asked. "Help more kids?" Emma didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. It was a sketch of design for something she called the safe box. It included crayons, a stuffed dog, flashcards, and a small notebook. At the bottom of the drawing was one phrase, carefully printed in crayon. "Sometimes I can't say it, but I can still show you." Marie studied the page, and then she smiled. "Let's build it." Within months, the first safe box kits were being tested in child services offices across the state. They were simple, quiet tools, but they opened doors. Children who had never spoken were now drawing, writing, pointing, communicating. The project received a grant. Emma never appeared in commercials or press releases. She didn't want to. But every box came with a small sticker that read, "Inspired by Emma and Luna," and with each kit delivered, another child found a way to tell their story. On the anniversary of her final court day, Emma and Luna returned just once to the Emma and Luna room. It hadn't changed. The same soft chairs, the same drawings on the wall. But now there was a photo display showing dozens of other kids who had passed through. Many of them had sat with their own support dogs. Some had drawn pictures. Some had spoken their first words. Emma stood in front of the wall, hand in Luna's fur. and stared at all the faces. Marie came up behind her. You did this, she whispered. Emma shook her head slowly. We did. She turned to Luna, her eyes warm. The dog lifted her head, tail giving one slow thump against the rug. And Emma gave the signal. 2 taps. One more. Safe now. Always. And in that moment, surrounded by silence, memory, and the legacy of quiet courage, Emma smiled, for herself, for Luna, and for every child still waiting to be heard.